China is a lifetime ally of Russia, and they will do two great things together, except give weapons to the Russians or vehicles to the Russians. The Chinese made a very bad move, which is they entered into a relationship with a country that they assumed had a much more powerful military than it did. And that means that Xi has some things to answer for, but no harm has been done yet. But China has a much deeper problem. Its economic problem resembles that of Japan in 1991. Its financial system is completely skewed. Its dependence on exports skews the entire Chinese system, especially with its largest customers, the United States, given to fits, tantrums, and what else. Okay? Dependent on the United States. The United States is deeply involved against the Russians. Doesn't absolutely need those Chinese exports. China can only go so far. They can do good, but only that far.
In an interview, George Friedman, a geopolitical analyst, discussed various issues related to China and its relationship with Russia, the United States, and Taiwan. According to him, China has made a big mistake by assuming that Russia had a more powerful military than it actually does. As a result, China has entered into a relationship with a country that may not be able to provide significant military support in the event of a conflict. This mistake could have long-term consequences for China, and it will need to answer for it. Friedman also discussed China's economic problems, which he compared to Japan's financial crisis in 1991. He argued that China's economy is overly reliant on exports, which is skewing the entire economic system, especially its largest customers. The United States, in particular, has the power to set standards and influence China's economic growth. However, the United States does not need Chinese exports, and China can only go so far before facing economic challenges. Regarding the issue of Taiwan, Friedman argued that China's ability to invade and take control of the island is limited. China has only 6 or 8 amphibious transport craft, and it would need all of them to land at the same time on the same beach to have any chance of successfully invading Taiwan. However, this would be difficult due to the number of missiles that could be fired at these ships during the crossing of the Taiwan Strait. China's vulnerability to an amphibious assault is overwhelming, and it is unlikely that China will attempt to invade Taiwan anytime soon. Friedman also raised concerns about the shutdown of a crucial financial center in Shanghai amid a financial crisis. He suggested that China may be trying to find a reason to shut down the city, or may have let loose a new disease to justify the shutdown. He added that China will have to answer to the international community about the closure of the city during a crucial meeting of the Central Committee. In a nutshell, George Friedman argued that China faces significant internal problems and that its economic system is imbalanced. A Russian-Chinese alliance is impossible given their geographic and historical differences, and China should not mess with the Americans. The United States has tremendous power, and its idiosyncratic approach to foreign policy is deciding the fate of Central Asia, Ukraine, and the Pacific. Friedman suggested that China needs to address its internal problems and be cautious in its foreign policy approach to avoid potential long-term consequences.
As for invading Taiwan, there's 2 ways to answer this. One, why didn't they do it already? Shut up and do it. And the other thing is you can't. China has 6 amphibious transport craft, possibly 8. In order to take Taiwan, all those 8 have to land at the same beach at the same time to give you power to hold the beach and move forward. It will take 6 to 9 hours after fully loaded for those ships to cross the Taiwan Strait. During that time, the number of missiles that can be fired at those boats are pretty extraordinary. And that's why the Chinese never did it, because the Chinese know perfectly well that their vulnerability of an amphibious assault is just overwhelming. So we have China now dealing with internal problems. They made an agreement. It doesn't really have any substance to it given this invasion of Ukraine. Their economy is imbalanced in the extreme. They're really going to go through the kind of thing the United States went through in 1929. In 1880, we started being the world's producer of low-grade schlock being sent out for everybody. By 1910, we were producing half the world's low-grade schlock, plus some good stuff too. When they couldn't buy it anymore, we held a depression. Japan was in exactly the same position in 1990. They had been the low-grade schlock producer for my lifetime. It was made in Japan, was a joke. Then they upgraded to tech and all sorts of other things, which is very good. Then they decided to hold a meltdown. The lost decade, they called it. Why, I don't know. You do not have permanent economic growth anywhere. There's something called the business cycle. There's the long cycle, there's a short cycle, and it will get you. And China's now reached a long cycle. So this is a country with a lot of problems. That plus the fact that cities keep getting closed and nobody will leave. That's interesting. A Russian-Chinese alignment is impossible. It's just geographically impossible, historically impossible. Secondly, we've seen Russia do something that it absolutely had to do and is in the process of failure. And we see the cost there is. In the Pacific, we see China focusing on a non-critical solution. Take the Philippines. That's a serious solution. Taiwan can be surrounded. Taiwan can be overcome. Taiwan maybe is the best place to do where you waste the Chinese military. A lot of different ways. But what the Chinese have learned is don't mess with the Americans. Now, I got criticized by my readers for being pro-American, but the point is, what has emerged from this is the enormous power of the United States. Unorthodox power. It is not the power the Russians expected to see. It is not the Americans standing back and waiting to surge into Ukraine. It is building a structure that doesn't require it. In other words, we look pretty smart. Not that often, but here we go. In China, they keep saying they're going to have a nuclear war. Do they understand that they will be personally nuclear dust 30 minutes afterwards? Yes, they do, which is why they don't do it. As I said about Iran once, the best thing to have is a nuclear program. The worst thing to have is a nuclear weapon. This was about Israel. Okay? Israel can live with a nuclear program. Nuclear weapon, it's going to hit. And the same thing with what we're seeing here. So what is emerging from this, counter to what you will hear, I think, from most other people, is the tremendous power of the United States. A very idiosyncratic power, but one that decided the fate of Central Asia, of Ukraine, is deciding the fate of the Pacific, of China, and is doing so with extraordinary fewer casualties than any other activity.